Okay. Again, good afternoon. Hopefully it's not rainy where you all are, but it is certainly a fall afternoon today. My name is Monica Johnson-Hosmer, and I'm the Executive Director at the North Carolina Coalition Against Sexual Assault. And we are also being joined by our colleagues at the North Carolina Coalition Against Domestic Violence as well. We are delighted that you're able to join us, and hopefully, looks like we may have a few return people from our first call earlier this week as well. So just a few things in terms of process on the call this afternoon is some of you are already doing it, but it'd be great if you put your name and information in the chat so we can see who's here. We are going to start with the link to the application. We're going to walk through that briefly. So if you would, Beth from NCCADV, thank you, has already put the link in the chat. I'm going to recommend if you don't have the application pulled up that you may want to pull it up now before we begin to walk through it. Again, we're excited to share information, resources, and ideas together today. We are very fortunate that we are here because both sexual assault and domestic violence both were awarded $6 million each issue in CARES Act funding by the General Assembly before they left to go home. So while that's great news, the difficulty of this, and many of you have shared your stress levels up or your anxiety, but it is a significant amount of money, almost $100,000 per county as agencies funded by Council for Women, which we'll walk through that shortly. But that's a significant amount of money, and it all has to be expended and accounted for by December 30th. Please make a note on your calendar. It's December 30th, not the 31st. I know, very odd, but that's the federal act, and that's the date that's set for everyone who's receiving CARES Act funding. So please do note December 31st is the date. Excuse me. So Deanna is going to verbally walk us through the application, and we'll facilitate questions. We have Beth and other folks facilitating the chat, so we will make sure to try to get your questions as you're asking them in the chat, especially as they are specific to the parts of the application. Once the application walkthrough is complete, then Deanna and Beth together will take questions, and I'm pretty sure Council for Women will be on here. Yes, I see Mary. So Mary's on here as well. So we can take questions after the application is complete if those questions were not related directly to the actual application process. We will share ideas and resources again about how to spend this money and certainly answer questions to the best of our ability. We have an FAQ up thanks to the partnership of NCCASA, NCCADV, and Allison at the Council for Women. So we started the FAQ based on the questions and responses that were put together after the first call. I see Allison's also in the chat providing you all information here as well. So if you can see your chat, again, you may want to try to use your chat to ask questions, but also click on links as they come up. The biggest thing I want to remind you all is it is a significant amount of money indeed. However, just as we do with our state funding, accountability is going to be important. Although we have a short application, there's only one reporting period for this funding. I do want to remind you that it's federal funding, that there certainly will be an audit. Yes, I repeat, there will be an audit of this funding because we are, thanks to the Council for Women, going to execute the contracts as quickly as possible. You have to expend the money as quickly as possible. So the follow-up will certainly be an audit of some sort. So please ask questions to ensure that you are fully understanding what's allowable throughout this process. And again, this is not your last opportunity to ask questions. There will be an hour open time for people to drop in and ask questions tomorrow as well. So we will continue to collect your questions and answers, and we will continue to update the FAQ so that everyone has access to the questions that your colleagues may be asking offline. We want to be sure that everybody has access to as much information as possible throughout this process. Spending it is going to be difficult and anxious, and I will start by saying someone asked earlier this week, and I will reiterate, we hope everyone has ideas and will consider applying for the full amount, but it is okay if you choose not to apply for the full amount. We want to know as soon as possible whether you think you can spend the money or not, so that we can be sure to try to find other ways to allocate it to prove to our state legislators as we return next year asking for money in our general appropriations that we've proven that, one, we can expend money, and two, that we've done it diligently and intentionally, providing services, support, and outreach related to sexual assault and domestic violence victims during this time of COVID. That's the last piece that I'll remind you of, is everything in this application has to be tied back to COVID. Again, this is CARES Act funding, so the money has to be related to the outcomes support of survivors during COVID. And again, the FAQ has a few questions already, but we look forward to the questions and conversation with you all. And again, thank you for joining us, and I'll turn it over to you, Deanna.
Monica. So I'm going to share my screen.
Deanna, can you talk a little louder as well?
Yes, sorry about that. So I'm going to share my screen so that you all can see the PowerPoint, and we will get started. All right. So just a review of our agenda today. So we are going to do a review of the application. We are going to have a conversation about creating the most impact with the funds being provided. There will be space for a Q&A. I do want to let folks know that during our time together, I'm only going to be focusing on the sections of the application that are required for you to complete. It is very important that you review each section of all the attachments, even if we're not talking about it today, because that is what you are legally agreeing to do. All right. So we're going to start with attachment A, which is the Special Appropriations Agreement cover. So you'll see at the top of that document, there is a statement that says this agreement is hereby made between the state of North Carolina, Department of Administration, and blank. You're going to place your agency name in the first blank with an address at blank, which should be your agency address. So one of the things I've seen as a question folks had is whether or not this should be their mailing address or their physical address. So there will be in attachment C, a place for your mailing address. For this document, it can be your physical address. So beneath that, it says the agreement consists of the following documents. So this is your checklist here of all the things you need to make sure that you're submitting. So attachment A, which we're looking at right now, attachment B, which are going to be your general terms and conditions. Attachment C is your payment request form. Attachment K is going to be your scope of work. And attachment L are going to be your reporting requirements. You will also, when you download the application, see an additional attachment that is your final status report, which will not be required for you to turn in at the time of your application. You will prepare that and send that in after the grant ends at the end of January. So the effective date will be March 1st, 2020. Your termination date is, again, this December 30th, 2020. So we'll continue to reiterate that. Make as many reminders for yourself as you need to that that's when this funding will end. Beneath that, you're going to see your federal COVID-19 relief assistance grant award amounts, and you're going to place the amount here. A couple things to note that are questions that have come up when we've gotten to this section of the application. You will submit, if you're a dual agency, an application packet for your domestic violence funds and an application packet for your sexual assault funds. If you are a standalone sexual assault agency, you will only submit one application for your sexual assault amount. These amounts are not broken up per county. This is one total amount for your entire agency, no matter what your service coverage may be. So to know how much you are to place in this line here, you're going to look at the 2 bullets down on this document where it talks about the actual amount of funds that are being provided to DV and SA centers. So for domestic violence centers, for your application for DV, you're going to make sure you place $56,603. For your sexual assault program of your agency, you're going to receive dual agencies $50,649. Standalone agencies, you're $95,454. And again, you'll see a note here at the bottom, dual agencies will need to submit 2 applications, one for DV and one for SA. For programs that are part of a larger organization, but it's not domestic violence, for instance, we have agencies who are part of mental health organizations. You are still considered a standalone agency for the state, and so your application amount will be $95,454. I'm going to pause here because this is a place where we had questions on Tuesday to see if there are any questions that have popped up in the chat so far. So Beth, are there any questions?
There are no questions yet.
Thank you. All right, so our next bullet is your scope of work. So this, where they're looking for a brief description. So we really just want 3 to 4 concise sentences of how your agency is going to utilize these funds. Next is attachment B. The only thing that you're responsible for filling out in attachment B is under letter C. You'll see a box that will have the department for which the funding is being issued through. So you'll see the information for the Department of Administration. And then you'll see a box that says recipient. This is where you'll place your information. So your name of the executive director, your agency name, your agency address, and your agency telephone number. The other thing you'll be responsible for on attachment B with your general terms and conditions is the effective period. So this is an error. Please note that this contract shall be effective on, this should say March 1st of 2020, not October 1st. So March 1st of 2020 and shall terminate on December 30th of 2020. So here's that date again, and you'll see we've placed an arrow here to draw your attention. Make sure that you have a way of reminding yourself of this end date. So I'll repeat again, the effective period, there's an error on the PowerPoint. It should be March 1st, 2020, and not October 1st, 2020. On attachment B, is it our physical address or our PO box? So attachment B is your physical address. There's another document where you'll place your actual mailing address if it is different than your physical address. Okay. Attachment B is a page that it does require a signature. So you'll see that there are 2 spaces. One will be where the Department of Administration signs. The second will be for your agency. So you're going to insert your agency name, the printed name of the person who is signing, your date, and then the signature of the authority and their name and title, which you'll place underneath. Please make a note, this can be your executive director. And I'll pause here. Are there any questions in the chat, Beth?
No questions.
Right. Okay. So attachment C, this is going to be your payment request form for these special appropriations. So you'll see there's 2 columns on this page. The first one has your recipient information, and the second one is your payment allocation. So we're going to talk about recipient information first. So under recipient, for A, you're going to insert your agency name. For B, it's your address. Here's where they want your mailing address. So if your mailing address is different than your physical address, this is where you'll place that information. C, your city, your state, which should already be pre-filled out for North Carolina. D is the contact's name at your organization who will be responsible for answering any questions related to your application or how you're going to be utilizing these funds during your grant cycle. Be sure to also list their position within your organization. If it's not your executive director, that's fine. We just need to know who it is. Is it the associate director? Is it a grants manager? What role does this person serve? Or your financial person? What role do they serve? A contact number for that person. Okay. You'll see F, which is your kind of organization. So for nonprofits, you will check the box on other. If you are a program that functions underneath a government, so within your county or your Department of Social Services or Health Department, you'll check the box government. Okay. G is again your purpose. So it's the brief 3 to 4 sentences that you'll place here around how your agency will utilize these funds. This can be the same statement that you placed in attachment A. The second column you'll see, Roman numeral 2, is your payment allocation. Under letter A, you'll see SFY. Leave this blank. You'll see amount. This is where you'll place your dollar amount for which your this application is relevant to. So as a reminder, here are the amounts that you will be eligible for. Under B, you'll see amount requested this payment. You're going to place the same amount that you placed in letter A right here under letter B. You all will only be requesting these funds once. They will be paid to you in advance, and so you will not need to worry with letter C or letter D. Again, letter C and letter D should be left blank. Letter B, you'll fill out with the amount of this particular application. So I'll pause and see if there are any questions.
No questions at this time.
Thank you. All right, we must have a lot of repeaters. So they're all waiting till the end so they can ask questions that aren't relevant to the application, which is fine. So attachment C, this is the continuation that you'll see. Under Roman numeral 3, you'll see the period ending. You will see that the one-time payment box is checked. Again, because you all will receive these funds as a one-time payment in early October. There will be no match required, so you'll see the box checked no. Please make a note, attachment C is also a signature page. You will have a notary who needs to notarize this form, so you want to make sure you make accommodations for that person and getting it done before the deadline of September 30th. The recipient, physical officer, or other official. So this signature here, if you are able to get your board treasurer, great. If you're not able to, please make a note. It says other official. So as executive director, as a board chair, you can have them sign here. We want to decrease as many barriers as we can. So they're being flexible in who they are asking for this signature. Make sure you have their printed name and then the date. Okay. So next is attachment K, and this is going to be your scope of work document. So you'll see at the top, grantee name. You're going to fill out the name of your agency. You'll see the project and activity title, which will already be filled out for you, and the period in which it covers. So again, here's that pesky date we'll keep reminding you of 12/30/2020. Underneath that, you'll see where you all are being asked to talk about a description of your activities and accomplishments that you'll undertake in using the funds that the state is providing in this special allocation. So you complete this section. It doesn't have to be lengthy. We want to hear, again, your very brief purpose statement of the funds that you've placed on attachment A and also now C. The purpose of your project, what activities or tasks will you complete in order to meet the purpose, and how will these activities or tasks be measured for success. So if part of utilization of these funds includes buying certain equipment for staff to be able to continue to provide services remotely, then your measurement might be purchase of equipment, and equipment was purchased. Next, underneath that, you'll see where there's the general description of the planned expenditures. So these are the line items or budget categories in which you're allowed to utilize these funds connected to COVID-19. Employee expenses, services and contract expenses, goods expenses, which include your supplies and equipment, your admin expenses, and then other expenses, they've included travel here. You want to make sure that the total is equal to whatever your grant award amount will be. So I'm going to pause here because I know from Tuesday, this section, we had some questions from folks that started to come in. So I'll take a couple minutes and see if any of those pop up in the chat. So there's a question from Aaron. What type of travel? So travel would be related to if you yourself, your agency is having staff travel to meet with survivors, to do client work, that could be included here. If you are paying for any type of travel related expense for survivors, such as bus passes, taxis, Ubers, Lyfts, whatever that might be, that also is considered a travel expense.
We have another question asking what category would the advertising, such as billboards and commercials for victim outreach, go towards?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So if advertising, you are going to have a contract, then you would place it under the services and contract expenses.
So another question is, would this cover mortgage of interest?
So I will defer that question to Counsel for Women. Mary, do you have an answer for that question?
And interest would not be included there. That's an expense that you would have already budgeted for, and it would be difficult to justify how that is specific to COVID-19.
Okay. And then there's a couple questions about outreach. Would it go under other, or where should they put that?
It really depends on the form of outreach. So Tiffany, do you want to be more specific? Billboards, pizza boxes, etc. So with a billboard, again, if you have a contract with the billboard company, then it would go under services/contract. If you, for the pizza boxes, you wouldn't necessarily have a contract. It sounds like you're just buying space. So Mary, would it be okay for those expenses to fall under other, or would you want them to fall under another category?
Other's fine, as long as you can explain it or put some sort of parentheses around it and it makes sense. It ties back to your activities and your purpose.
Great, thank you.
Could travel include gas cards? Is that an allowable expense?
No.
No. Could we pay for repairs and maintenance on our building and parking lot? And I believe that's dependent on if you can relate it to being COVID related.
Yes, that's correct.
Is there a cap on administrative expenses?
I believe Mary said 20, Mary, it's 20%.
I said 20%, and again, any administrative expenses have to tie back to the cost of the service of the expense. Have to tie back to COVID-19, and you have to be able to justify them for an auditor.
Okay. Will they be able to do budget transfer requests if they put down one amount but need to move money from one category to another?
Yes.
If Aaron had asked if we're not allowed to pay for gas cards, could we cover filling a client's car with gas?
So the answer would be yes, but you have to have a procurement policy in place that discusses that process so that an auditor can be able to go back and check that your process is in line with your policy.
Another question is, can you include rent and utilities that were paid for the thrift store space when the store had to close due to COVID-19?
So do you use the thrift store for outreach or information or education in any way?
I believe that question came from, okay.
Gary, yeah.
Yeah, so just, I'm trying to type and I can't type fast enough.
Okay, you can unmute yourself.
To answer your question, our store is always promoting domestic violence and sexual assault awareness, including donations we get through there, through all of our, we have a lot of things that we do through there, including changing window dressings and T-shirts and advertisements and a list of people who have died from COVID, I mean, from domestic violence. So yes, to answer your question, I just know, when you had to close a store for 6 to 8 weeks because of it, that was a great loss of revenue with an expense that you had to pay.
So the purpose is, the justification cannot be to replace the lost revenue. The justification for that expense would need to connect directly back to retrofitting the space for safety, allowing clients and survivors to access the information in a way that they would not have had to pre-COVID-19. You see the distinction?
Yes, I think so. I follow you.
Yeah, we want to make sure that you folks are really clear that, be very careful, about not supplanting funds.
The next question is for COVID-related construction, such as building a wall to turn a shared office into 2 single ones to minimize risks. Would that be considered a contracted expense because we are contracting with a builder?
Yes.
Yes. Would ED salary go under employee expenses or administrative expenses?
Courtney, that's going to be dependent on if the ED is doing something that is connected to serving survivors who've been impacted by COVID. So it depends on how their role is being used for the percentage of time on this project, of what category they would fall under.
Janie asked, if you adopted a policy that covered hazard pay for extra work due to the pandemic that will cover March 1st, 2020, will it be covered under March 1st, 2020? believe you're asking if it can cover back pay through from March 1st, 2020. Is that correct?
And Janie, if you want to unmute yourself, you can, instead of having to type in the chat to clarify.
Yes, I'm sorry about that. I wanted to make sure you guys understood me. Yeah, we were looking, we'll develop a policy that if there was any funding available, that staff could be paid for the hours they worked during the worst part of the pandemic. And could we go back to March the 1st and then bring it up to date, or to the point that we came back in? Make sense?
Yes, I understand what you're asking.
Yeah.
Okay.
I
Okay.
understand. So we do know that these funds can be used for hazard pay, but we
Okay.
ask that you keep in mind everything about hazard pay in terms of having a policy for your agency, and that
Mhm.
being something that's applicable to anyone in your agency, not just a specific position
Right.
who falls under a specific grant program or priority. But I think that, as Mary mentioned, like if you're using it if you're going to use it for that purpose because you lost funding due to like the lack of a fundraiser or whatever it might be, that's going to make it really difficult. So you want to be very clear that this money wasn't already allocated somewhere else.
Okay. Gotcha.
Correct, Mary? Is there anything you'd add to that?
No, that's absolutely right. Yep, hazard pay is allowed with those caveats, for sure.
Okay. Thank you.
So hopefully, LaTanya, that answered your question as well.
Aaron asked, could it cover repairs to agency-owned shelter, specifically to replace windows? Utility rates have risen in our city, thus increased utility costs. Again, any kind of repairs or anything are going to have to be tied back to COVID, and how you would link that to COVID.
Okay.
All right, the next question, could we buy a new van for transporting clients?
So we've had a lot of questions about vehicles.
Yes,
So-
I checked on that, and
Mary.
the vehicle question is allowable with certain narratives and explanations. So are there other resources that you can use to fill the gap for transportation? If not, why does this vehicle, why is it necessary in order for you to continue to provide services during this time? So it is allowable, but you have to be able to answer those questions and be prepared for the auditor who will have those questions.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you. Rosa wanted to know, back to the question about the hazard pay, is there a cap on hazard pay? And does that include the 20%? Oh, the 20% for administrative costs. So is hazard pay included in the cap for the 20% of administrative costs? And is there a cap on how much they can give for hazard pay?
Well, that would be based on your policy.
And I'm guessing that whether it would fall under administrative expenses is dependent on how that employee is related onto the grant.
Yes, that's correct.
We're in the process of remodeling our shelter to make it easier to clean for COVID, replacing carpets with easier cleaning surface. Would this be an acceptable expense?
Yes, if you can
Yes.
relate it back to COVID-19.
And I think, that definitely relates back, so yes. Would the purchase of a storage shed to store supplies for the purpose of freeing up that space to provide services safely to clients be an acceptable cost? And if what you're meaning is to provide services safely is to give more spaces because of COVID and to keep them distanced, as long as I think you're very clear about how that is COVID related, that could be. But I will allow Mary to step in if I have stated that incorrectly.
No, yep. Long as you can document how the purchase of that shed, which you will purchase and put in place before the end of the year, is meeting that need. Sounds like it would.
If revenue from a fundraiser that was used to repair and maintain building and parking lot, but due to COVID-19, the event was canceled, would that be a replaced revenue to allowable expense because shortfall is due to COVID?
No, the revenue replacement is not a allowable.
If a pre-existing employee's duties changed as a result of COVID, can we charge the reasonable allocable portion of their salary?
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Hey, Mary, I just want to clarify from the question above. This is Alexis from NCCADV. If an organization needed repair and maintenance so that they could continue to house survivors, could they use COVID money to pay for that?
So based on the guidance I've received, it is, so no construction is allowed unless it is connected. It wasn't in your budget before, right? Number one. It is unexpected and new cost or expense, and then it's related now to your serving victims. So if you already a year ago needed this repair and you didn't do it because you didn't have the money, but now you have the money and now you want to do the repair, then no, right? But if this is something that, yeah, so that, I don't want to belabor it, but the whole idea of construction, unless it is, like someone asked earlier, they're putting up dividers and that will allow them to safely have greater capacity for services, then that's justifiable.
And I also, Mary, since I have you, wanted to go back to the gas cards, because in the FAQ that we put out earlier this week, it said that gas cards can be purchased. And so I know we had a question earlier and said that gas cards were no, but you could pay to fill up a survivor's car, as long as your procurement policy and you're tracking it and keeping good records. So I just want to maybe offer an opportunity to clarify for everyone if gas cards can be purchased, and if so, as long as you have a policy and good records of how they've been handed out, would that be allowable?
Well, that is normally a tricky one, because as the agency, you are the one that's responsible for justifying how those gas cards are being utilized. So that makes it more difficult for you than having, say, for example, a contract with a business that has a gas station, or, looking at it from that perspective. So how are gas cards more needed now than they were needed before COVID-19? How would you justify that? just hypothetically, how would you justify this as an additional necessary expense? Is
This
the bus, is
Cecilia.
the bus route changed? Are people not comfortable riding the bus now? Or are you seeing an increase, or because of unemployment, people don't have the resources to get to your, I mean, you know what I'm saying? You have to be able to have a justification for it that distinguishes it from something that you would have done in the past. I'm sorry, I cut someone off.
This is Cecilia from Rachel, Cherokee County. And our clients, it would be due to loss of job because of COVID, and the lack of transportation, because the transit bus only runs during the day, and they don't run in the evening. So we'd have to help get with taxi and transportation.
So I think remembering what Mary just said, and remembering that if it is something that has changed because of COVID, so if the transportation route didn't change because of COVID or its availability, then that's not a reason that you would list, right? But if it's because survivors have lost employment due to COVID and have less access to financial means, then that would be an acceptable answer. Does that make sense?
Or having a contract with a different a transportation vendor, who is only working with your agency for the purpose of supporting your clients and their additional transportation needs.
And this is Erica, also keeping in mind that you have to be able to track it. So I think that is also a very important thing to remember about the gas card. You have to be able to track the expenditures on it.
And we'll have more time at the end to do even more of a deeper dive into questions after we get through the whole application. So we can definitely circle back if folks have questions, but I'll let Beth continue to go through the questions that are currently listed. We'll take, maybe a couple more, and then I'm going to move on to the next slide. And then if we didn't answer it this go around, we will definitely answer it at the end.
There's a question to whether it can pay for an audit. I'm not sure how the.
Go ahead, Beth.
I was going to say, I don't know how that would be COVID related.
Mm-hmm.
Can pay for an audit if the amount that you're receiving has taken you over a certain threshold.
Yeah.
A single audit is allowed.
So yeah, if your threshold's going to be more than, I think it's 500,000 and you'll need a single audit, then yes. If not, no.
Will the expenses be approved in the grant application, such as the ones for Council for Women approves? Then will the auditor will not then be allowed to disallow? Sorry, I did not read that one very well. So will expenses be approved in the grant application, such as the one Council for Women approves? Then the auditor will not then be allowed to disallow. So if it's in the application and approved, will the auditor be able to come back later and disallow it? Like, is Council for Women going to review everything in the budgets and approve them?
The auditor can come back and disallow. Your records have to be maintained for 5 years. Auditing will happen. This is auditing through the OSBM and the North Carolina Pandemic Recovery Office, which, because of the large amount of funds coming through the state, will be doing a very diligent job of auditing. So if I'm understanding you, you're saying if I add this expense to my application and no one tells me I can't do it, then I'm good. I would say no. You're only good if it adheres to what we've said. It's necessary expense because of COVID. You can demonstrate how it's necessary with a paper trail. The expenditure occurs before the end of the year, December 30th, and you have the documentation in place when requested. So for example, we're not requesting contracts with vendors to be submitted as part of this, but at some point we will expect you to have that.
The next question is, could we buy furniture or used furniture donations because their used furniture donations are down along with other donations due to COVID, and then rent a storage unit through June 2021 that was prepaid by the end of this grant to hold the furniture that they give out to clients upon their exit to permanent housing?
Buying furniture to meet the needs related to COVID-19 is allowed. So for example, you're changing your facility, your agency, and you need different furniture. But prepaying for something after the end of the grant year is not allowed. The service has to have been utilized by December 30th.
All right, so let's, Beth, if you just want to do one more question and then I'll move forward in the slides and we'll get to the rest of them.
I'm looking for one that's maybe a little bit different than what we might have heard. Can hotel rooms be covered due to the reduced capacity in the shelters for social distancing?
Absolutely.
And then one other related question, is there a point in the application process where we're asked to write out the justifications, or is this just in preparation for the audit? Since that one's.
The expenses should relate to the scope of work and the purpose of the project. And yes, you want to be prepared for the audit so that there's a connection. So the purpose and the activities, for example, change the retrofit our offices so that we can maintain safety as an example. And then when the audit occurs, then you can produce your receipts for that retrofitting or your receipts for the contract with the vendor or the construction vendor. So there's a paper trail.
Okay, I'll take notes on the rest of the questions that are in the chat box so that I can maybe grab some themes and bring them up again after we're done with the application. Does that work?
Sure. Okay. So attachment L is a list of your reporting requirements. So you will have only one final report, which again is in the application packet. And the reporting period will be March 1st to December 30th. And the due date of that grant report is going to be January 30th of 2021. So just a recap of first the signature pages that you'll need. So signatures required on attachment B and C. Again, this can be your executive director's signature. And also make a note that attachment C also requires a notary. The recap of important dates. The due date for the application is September 30th of 2020, and you will be submitting that via email, and we'll make sure that that email gets placed in the chat. Your grant end date is December 30th of 2020, and your final report is due January 30th of 2021. Okay. So now we can talk a little bit more about the actual funding. And so these are some ideas that were generated between both coalitions and Council for Women of use of the funds. So you may want to like contract with an employment specialist to help survivors find jobs, prepare their resume, and practice interviewing as it relates to COVID-19. Purchase equipment to expand online services. You can contract with a website designer if you're looking to make sure that survivors know that you're still available to provide services during this time. So a lot of those outreach type expenses, you can use it to pay for emergency client needs connected to COVID. So, you know, is a survivor who lost income during COVID because of a job loss, needing help with housing expenses or phones, or are you seeing an increase of violence that would lead to folks needing to go to the hospital and possibly needing clothes at the hospital? Expanded outreach. For translation services. So again, how that's connected to COVID-19.
Sexual Assault Coalition, federally recognized state coalition.
Your technology and equipment. Again, with awareness campaigns, you can use this for PPE, for your cleaning supplies, hotels or other direct aid to survivors, school needs for survivors or clients' children. And so if they need access to computers or desks, things to support them if they have students who are in the virtual academy. So now we'll open it back up to Q&A again. And so we can start where we left off with questions. So I'll turn it over to Beth.
Okay, so there was some ask for clarification on the hazard pay. If they have had, if they have a policy in place that goes back to March 1st, but they have not had the funds to pay their employees, can they backdate to March 1st to do that hazard pay?
Yes, as long as those employees have been working and delivering the service and you can account for their hours and time.
Okay. There was a question about adding an additional bathroom into the shelter in order to help be able to quarantine and separate clients. Again, as long as that's related to COVID, which, I mean, that's a very COVID-related reasoning for it, that can be an allowable expense. There was some questions. I was going to say, did anybody want to add anything to that before I go on to the next one? There were some questions around direct client services, such as rent and utilities. If it can be COVID related, is that an allowable expense?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that question. Can you ask it again?
Sure, sorry about that. Direct client services such as rent and utility, is that going to be an allowable expense?
Again, as long as they're COVID-19 related, these are not funds that were already put into your budget.
Okay. For the reporting, can guidance be provided on how to tie these funds to client services? I noticed the report asked about how many victims were served with these funds. And I'm guessing you would like clarification, like if you use it for one of the big item purchases or to like when you're making the wall or adding a bathroom or those types of things and not providing more direct services to the clients.
That's a good question. I'm not sure I have the answer to how exactly you can tie it back other than tracking with the time that you have available. How either what you expect to provide and or then what you did provide in terms of the people who were served.
Yes, dual agencies will need to submit 2 applications, one for the DV funds and one for the SA funds. There is a payroll question. Apparently this came up the other day that says our pay date is the last business day of the month, so it will be December 31st. Can I still allocate staff salaries for December if they are prorated not to include that last day? Or is the fact that staff are paid outside of the grant period going to disallow all December payroll expenses?
Those expenses will have to incur out before December 30th. So, for example, state employees receive their December check on the 15th of the month, even though typically we receive our checks at the end of the month. But because it's the holiday, that adjustment has been made. I'm not sure if that's something that you can do at your agency, but that's an example.
Can the funds be used to cover vehicle insurance? They're having a donated vehicle to transport clients. And this is due to COVID reasons.
Only through December 30th.
Okay, so they could use it for those 3 months or till December 30th. Can the money be used to add an advocate to provide services for increased numbers they're seeing for the October through December timeframe? Yes. As long as you can contribute those increases to COVID, and it's only for that time period and hadn't already been allocated to something else in you were receiving. Do expenses need to be incurred and paid by December 30th?
Yes.
So they would need to move payroll dates up in order to have that expense count. And that is the end of the questions. I think I've got them all, and I apologize if I missed anyone. Oh, my agency is responsible for 2 counties. Are we eligible for 2 grants?
If you're currently receiving 2 grants through the state, then you would be eligible.
For outreach, for example, a billboard, if we pay up front to have a billboard starting in December, but it ends up staying up through March, but was already included in the payment, would that be prepaid? Or would they have to prorate for the time that was covered through the grant?
Well, you're paying for it before December, and it's occurring before December. So I think that would be okay. Because the execution is occurring before December. As long as you're billed, you have the contract, you get the billing, and you pay for it before December 30th.
I think there's a little confusion in the per county versus per program and what it says in the frequently asked questions.
Hey Beth, I can answer that a little bit.
Thanks.
So in the FAQs, it's referring to counties that may have more than one program, because that was the question that came up at the last session. So I will update those to make it more clear to reflect what Mary just said, and that is that if you are eligible for more than one state grant because you're in more than one county, then that is the same thing that applies here. So hopefully that will fix that confusion.
So Allison, this is Deanna. I just want to make sure we get this right, because so what you're saying is, if, for example, we have a dual agency or a standalone sexual assault program who serves 6 counties, they're going to receive $96,000 6 times.
I think what Mary just said.
Yeah, if that agency, and I think there's only one of those, if that agency,
no, there's multiple standalones.
If that agency, well, we only included the standalones that are contracted with the state as a standalone agency. So I'm trying to think of an example.
So I'm thinking of like Coastal. So they have Pender, Brunswick, New Hanover, and Duplin. So are we saying they'll submit a contract or application for each county? So four applications.
Yes.
Requesting $96,000 for each county.
Yes.
And their agency would then get $96,000 times 4?
Yes.
Okay.
As long as they're currently getting a state grant for 4, which they are.
Okay.
Then the same applies.
Okay. And so Courtney, your question about multiple dual service agencies would then also, I'm assuming, Mary, be the same if they're serving multiple counties.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification.
And there was just some clarification again on the outreach for either commercials or billboards. If they have to do a year-long contract, which would take them past the December 30th cutoff date, but everything is paid for prior to December 30th, those are all allowable costs or not.
Not optimal. I would wonder if you were able to work out an arrangement with the billboard company that would allow a different contract cycle. But that may be something we need to talk about one-on-one if you send me an email.
Hey, this is Gabriella from NCCASA. We had the question, will staff need to go back to complete timesheets as proof of hazard duty/hours?
Yes. You just want to be able to demonstrate that the hazard pay is in fact for people who are working a percentage of their time in that role.
Would they need to do something different to the timesheets they have, or would the timesheets just being able to show that they were working during those time periods?
I think just being able to show they were working during the time period.
Okay.
And that if there are other specific demands on their time and for service delivery outside of what is normally required, that's always good to demonstrate.
It sounds like prepay is unallowable. Does that include paying for annual subscriptions like Zoom, or should we just get a monthly subscription?
Prepay is unallowable.
Okay.
So monthly, yeah.
So they could pay for the Zoom monthly and charge the months that are covered within this grant period. Or if they got the annual subscription to get a discount, they could prorate just for this time period also?
It's a good idea.
Are there different percentages of hazard pay that's allowed for, say, shelter staff versus office staff? And I'm going to guess that again goes back to what your policy states on what hazard pay is to be given.
I'm sorry, you guys are you waiting for an answer? I don't disagree with what you said.
Okay, no, there is no other questions in the chat right this minute. So I was just kind of giving a minute to see if anything else came through. Sorry. Stacy is asking to be unmuted.
Stacy, you should be able to unmute yourself. So it says you're unmuted on my end.
She said she's having technical difficulties. She's showing muted on my end, but I don't have the option to do anything about that.
Yeah, from my end, and I'm hosting, it shows that she is unmuted.
Okay. Stacy will ask later via email. Would hazard pay go under employee expenses and not the 20% for admin? And I think that again goes back to how that employee is classified, as whether they would be an administrative cost or
This is Courtney at Hope Line. I have a question, and I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time toggling between my screens here. In the FAQ, there is reference to being able to pay for certain expenditures outside. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm looking at number O that says, like, for example, a single audit. And I know a couple people asked about audit, but the audit period that would include these funds won't be done until this time next year, but O is saying that even that is permissible. Am I understanding that correctly?
I'm gonna ask Mary to answer that question.
So based on the guidance I've gotten from the NC Pro office, the single audit is allowed and the cost for that audit, particularly thinking like we just talked about Coastal Horizon and the multiple counties that they are serving, right? So the fact that the audit is completed after the cycle would be an exception in my mind. And it's an unbudgeted item, so perhaps prior to the grant, they would not have required an audit, and now they do require an audit because of the COVID money that they've received. So that is definitely a defendable expense.
So for record keeping purposes, do you feel if we got a written estimate from a CPA about the cost of a single audit, that then we could withhold that much funding from reversion to the state or include it in our expense report, even though it won't be paid until next fiscal year?
So would you contract with that accountant prior to the end? Could you contract with, okay, that's messy. That's a good question. I mean, I would think that you would have a relationship with the accountant. You get an estimate that would demonstrate how this is an additional cost. You can have a contract with that auditor or with that accountant and provide an initial stipend, perhaps. I don't know.
Okay.
I have to get more clarity on that, but I would count it in if you need to, and then make a note about it.
Okay, yeah, if we accept these funds, then we will definitely need a single audit, and they are very, very expensive. So any workaround we can find for that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. Good question. Has anyone come up with any great ideas of how you're going to spend the money?
And folks, feel free to unmute yourself to answer Mary's question.
I kind of thought we had a plan until I found out about the per county. So that changes a lot of things for us, especially with the time frame that really rules out any major construction or anything like that to turn it around in 3 months. But we're still brainstorming. I'd love to hear what other folks are doing.
And as a reminder for folks, we are going to have an hour tomorrow for folks to drop in and have these conversations. So if you don't have an idea right now, but you know, as you take a the rest of today and the evening to reflect on it, and you start to have ideas, we hope that you'll show up in the space and share those with your peers, like Courtney, to help them think through and give them some thoughts.
We also have put a list in the FAQ or on our website of the minority and women-owned businesses that provide services such as catering services, transportation services, marketing services, which I think a lot of folks would be thinking about how to expand their marketing capacity, given the fact that everything is online. And if your website currently has not been updated, or your technology has not been updated, this is a great opportunity to really update it, and maybe engage some of those marketing and website and information systems vendors. Also, I may have mentioned food services. If you are using hotels currently, good opportunity to perhaps engage some other small business vendors in helping you meet the food needs of your clients. So I would strongly encourage you to think about engaging some of those vendor relationships. Childcare services are another one for people who are having to provide education in shelter, and schools, and you're not trained as a elementary school teacher, you don't have anyone on your staff who can do that, then outsourcing or having a relationship there is another opportunity. Developing some specialized curriculum or outreach materials. So just encourage you to look at that information and use this as a way to develop some different kinds of relationships as well, and help small businesses in your communities.
We did have a couple more questions pop up in the chat. Sorry, my chat is jumping around everywhere and now I can't find it. Could the links to the official state or federal guidelines for these funds be shared? The CPA is requesting that. It says for COVID-related expenses that we are expensed off on a grant, but had to have a 20% match. Can we expense that 20% match on this grant?
Can we expense the 20% match? That sounds like a no to me, but I would need to follow up with you if you want to send me an email.
When will people be notified if their application was accepted?
Our next step in this process is to, after we get the applications, and thank you, we are already getting completed applications, so I'm really happy about that. Our next step is to utilize this information to complete the state's application, and to complete that by the 2nd of October, so that then we can do the payment requests on behalf of the state. And then we will hopefully be able to begin distributing those funds. So the email you will get will basically say your application has been approved and your funding is available.
So we have about 9 minutes left, so I want to make sure we make the most use of our time. So If for some reason your question has not been answered, can you unmute yourself and pose the question?
There was one that had just come in while Mary was talking that did ask, if I get a quote from a builder to renovate a room that we have been using for quarantine, but the work may not be completed by December 30th, will that pose a problem?
Potentially. The goal is you would have to work with that vendor to make sure that the work that they're doing can, to the best possible knowledge, be completed and paid for by December 30th.
And then I did miss one from Karina who said, we began working on and planning expansion of our shelter, but it was not completed. It was not budgeted for this year, but it would help increase the number of clients we can house safely for social distancing and reduce close client contact by adding an extra room and bathroom. Is this a justifiable expense?
So it sounds like it's construction for the specific purpose of allowing you to meet the needs in your community due to COVID-19. It was not a budgeted item. It does sound like it would be, and it can be completed before the time frame. It does sound like an allowable expense. As long as it's not simply a capital improvement.
Are there any other questions we missed from folks that you want to use this opportunity? Okay. So as we start to wrap up, oh, Stacy is asking for clarification on prepay when it comes to subscriptions and billboard leases. So
generally prepay is not allowed unless you can, generally prepay is not allowed. You have to pay for the service and receive the service within the grant cycle.
I feel like the question is, oops, shoot. Ah. Sorry about that. I feel like the question is more around like with a service that you receive, that you start receiving, but it's a service that whose utility extends beyond December. For example, like the Zoom subscription or the billboard, like if you get it and if we start it tomorrow and we go ahead and get it and it's up tomorrow, but then it is still up on January 1st, is that a problem?
Oh, I see. So for example, a subscription, that's a 12-month subscription, right? So you're not prepaying for the service that will not be delivered until after December 30th. You're starting to receive the service now so you can demonstrate that you are receiving the service.
it sounds like, yes, that's correct, Mary, that's the question.
Yes, and the other piece of that would be depending on what the subscription is for. So if it is for enhancing your ability for use of your internet and to conduct information, webinars, provide services using the computers and so forth, that's defendable based on COVID-19.
And it would not be considered prepay?
It's not totally prepay because you are receiving the service now.
Okay.
And like me, it'd be like insurance on regular grants. You expense insurance, even though you prepay it the month that you pay it out.
Right. That makes sense.
So in the chat, there was ask for a clarification on the billboard. It says would we have to prorate the money and only report for the time allotted, or can we report the whole bill? Because I believe earlier it was said that the billboard company was requiring a 1-year contract.
So you're going to begin the contract now. You're not prepaying for the year. You're engaging in the contract for the service now, and you're getting the service now. And the message connects to "we're still here," reaching out to people in your community. I think you can defend the billboard based on that caveat. It would be worth a conversation, though, to see if there's an exception that the company could provide. Depending on the amount of the contract. Thank you. Trying to make this easy, but just don't want the auditing to result in anything negative.
Yeah. So we want to thank everyone for participating today and asking your questions, and we will make sure that we save the chat, and that's also sent out. And if there were questions that were posed that weren't answered on the FAQ, Allison, are you going to update the FAQ that's on the website if there were new questions that haven't been asked before?
Yes, absolutely.
Great, thank you. So again, the coalitions are going to host a space tomorrow for an hour where you can drop in, and we will make sure that that Zoom link is provided in the chat and is in the follow-up email that is sent to you all. It will take around an hour to 2 hours for us to download the recording of this webinar, so it will be after that time frame that you'll receive our email, but both coalitions will send that out. And don't hesitate to reach out to us with whatever questions that you may have. We're happy to walk you all through it and process. And so if there's a question we can't answer, then we will, connect with Council for Women and try to get you an answer as soon as we can. So thank you all again for your time, and we appreciate all that you do. And thank you to Mary for being available to answer questions today, and to the DV Coalition for staff being present and available along with us. So have a great day, everyone, and I hope that we'll see some folks tomorrow to peer share some big, wonderful brainstorm ideas. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you.